Hey, what's up guys, Andrew here, and in this video I'll talk about the audio signal flow or the audio signal chain, making sense of the audio signal chain, and let's get to the video. So the first thing I want to talk about is some definitions. So I want to first start with the audio chain definition. So the audio signal flow is the path an audio signal takes from source to output. And I definitely want to show you my audio signal chain here. So in my chain, I'm actually running it through a VST right now. So in my chain, I have a noise suppressor, a gate, two EQs right now. I have one as a high pass, low cut, and I also have one that shapes the tone of my sound. And then I have a compressor built in to make sure that the volume, whether it's low or high, that gets controlled and compressed properly so it doesn't peak. For the compressor. I also have something called a loudness analyzer, and the loudness analyzer basically makes sure that my audio is meeting perceived loudness standards. So for example, the perceived loudness standard for podcasting is -16, for YouTube is -14, for Spotify is -14. YouTube recently changed theirs from -13 to -14 to meet the standards of the other DSPs. And so definitely have that on the chain. It's not absolutely necessary, but it has its benefits, especially if you're live producing on Twitch or YouTube. You know for a fact that you are meeting the loudness standards, which is -14 for the live streaming platforms. The next thing I have on the list here on the chain is a deesser. Now you can technically do a deesser through your EQ because of the tonal shape, the shaping of the EQ. You can do a correction, or you can just shape with the EQ, or you can have a deesser built into the audio chain. Now I opted to have them both just in case one doesn't catch some things, the other catches the other. Now in terms of the order of the actual chain itself, the order does matter. I would want to remove noise first before I start making changes to the actual texture of the sound, if you will. I wouldn't want noise to be in that because that would be working backwards, right? So it would be like swimming uphill. So I want to have the noise suppression and the gate first, and then from there work my way through the EQ, how I want to shape that, and then from there do the compressor, and from there the loudness analyzer, and then all from there at the end of the chain the deesser itself, or a limiter if you wanted to throw that at the end of the chain. So some working definitions as I kind of went through some of the things. Noise suppressor it eliminates unwanted noise. So let's kind of like dig into that a little bit. Now, specifically for my setup, my main room noise is somewhere between -39 and -42 dB. So knowing that, I can properly set the gate, or I could let the noise suppressor listen to the sound of the room, which you can get an app for that either on Android or Apple device, and just download the app, have your phone sit where most of the noise is. It'll capture that, and you can probably set your gate once you have that set up, right? So knowing that the room is a relatively quiet room, the preset that it gives me is the library type sound, right? So it's between -39, -42. So I kind of put it around -44. It works just right. Now, if you improperly set the gate, you'll begin to cut out a little bit. So you want to make sure that the noise, let's say, okay, so we can use this example. If the basement is where the noise is, then you want to set the meter right above, which would be the first floor, right? So you want to set it right above the noise floor. If you set it too high above the noise floor, when you're actually speaking into the mic, it'll actually cut out a little bit. So you want to make sure that you want to set that just above the noise floor so it catches what it needs to catch and you don't cut out when you're speaking. Also, you can set a high pass 60 hertz. Now 60 hertz is US for the hum sound. 50 hertz is the sound, from what I understand, the UK uses. So I use 60 on my particular setup. You can use a noise suppressor to actually have it listen to the sound of the room. And as it listens to the sound of the room, then you set that automatically with this particular plugin. So this is the Reafer standalone. If you hit the automatic and let it listen to the room sound, it'll set a meter at the red section. And once it's done setting the meter, you unselect the automatic and it'll set that setup for you for that meter itself. So noise suppression, very critical. The gate properly set up, extremely critical. And the next thing, let's look at our definitions real quick. Let's talk about EQ. So EQ is responsible for the tonal shaping of the sound, and it's basically sculpting the sound the way you want the sound to be. So if a microphone is not necessarily considered the best microphone on the market for sound, you can actually use the EQ to shape that sound itself, right? So if the lows are on that particular microphone needs to be adjusted, you can adjust it between the frequencies of 95 and between 20 and 95, which is the low end, right? If you're trying to shape the tone of the voice of the individual, that's somewhere between 100 and 300, right? So if you're trying to set up the actual box sound, you don't want it to be too boxy, but you want it to be somewhere in the middle, then that's between 1,000 and 3,000, right? I actually want to cut in and interrupt this YouTuber here. So when the sound spectrum for the EQ, 20 to 60 hertz is the low rumble, 100 to 300 is the core vocal frequencies, 350 to 600 is the box region, 1,000 to 4,000 is the mid-range, 4,500 to 8,000 is the sibilance zone, right? The de-essing and all that noise. 10,000 to 20,000 is the air and accent. So before you flame this YouTuber in the comments, I just wanted to butt in and just help him out a little bit. All right, so getting back to the definitions real quick. So we did the EQ, we spent some time on that. So let's talk about the compressor. Now the compressor is extremely important. Everything on the chain is important, but the compressor makes sure that when you're speaking very low, it brings the volume up. And when you're speaking very loud, it compresses it down, right? So if I'm going back, let's go back to the actual chain real quick. So here's the compressor at work. So if I start yelling into the mic, the compressor is going to make sure that that's being pushed down properly, so it's not exceeding a particular volume level as you guys are watching or listening to the actual audio. Now, even in post-production, I can actually go into like a tool like a DaVinci Resolve to make sure that as I'm speaking into the microphone, I can adjust post-production in DaVinci Resolve. But if I'm already doing that with a great audio chain, I have little to do on the back end for post-production. So if my suppressor is set properly, the gate is properly set, the EQs are exactly where they need to be, the compressor is working exactly the way it's supposed to be, whether it's an auto makeup gain or anything like that, right? The loudness meter is doing what it's supposed to be with the perceived loudness, and then the deesser is catching the harsh noises it needs to catch. And even at the end of that, if I decided to add a limiter somewhere between -3 and -1 for the limiter, if I wanted to do something like that, that chain is a pretty good chain heading into post-production. So there's little to do in post-production if your audio chain is set up the way it's supposed to. So the compressor, when it's working properly, as you're raising your volume, it's controlling that by bringing it down. And as you're speaking very low into the mic, it's bringing the volume back up. So that's the way the compressor works. Let's see what else we have. And last but not least, the deesser, which I have at the end of the chain. And I could technically put a limiter at the end of it if I wanted to, but I decided not to right now. But you could if you wanted to. So the Deesser is essentially catching the noises that are super S sounding, right? That's the purpose of the Deesser, to make sure that those harsh noises that are S related in any way, shape, or form, that is catching those sounds as you're speaking into the mic. So those S's were intentional, so you can see the actual meter at work, right? So that's essentially your audio chain. You have your noise suppressor, you have your gate, you have your EQ. You can have one EQ. Technically, if I wanted to do the high pass with this particular EQ, I could. I just decided to do it with Blue Cat, because Blue Cat allows you to do lows, mids, highs within the range, which I really liked. So I decided to use the Blue Cat for that. And from there, you have your compressor, your loudness, and then your Deesser. And then once it hits the ears of your consumer, right, the individual who is appreciating your content, they like the fact that it sounds good. And also, even if you wanted to throw a reverb at the end of the chain, you can do that as well. But for reverb, you have to be very light on the reverb, so the sound is not, so it's not worse sounding than you intended, because reverb, you have to be very, very light with it as you're making the adjustments there. And I think that's it, guys. So the audio chain, the audio signal flow is the path an audio signal takes from source to output. If you have everything in the chain set up properly, you can have a great sounding audio signal flow for anybody listening to your content, whether they're watching a video or they're listening to your podcast. Now, we recently recorded the episode 563 of our podcast, but before I let you guys go, or before I go, I should say, I want to show you something with Audacity. Now, in Audacity, we were talking about the loudness analyzer meter before, right? At -14, specifically for live production. So if you're doing Twitch, I guess this is a bonus. If you're doing Twitch or YouTube, you want to set that for -14. But in Audacity, and recent updates for Audacity, they actually added a meter for the loudness normalization built in. So if you click here, you can actually set, so for your podcast, the standard is -16. So when I'm exporting this is episode 563 of the podcast, link will be in the description. If you're doing a podcast, you want to do somewhere around 64K mono. If the audio sounds great going in, 64K mono is going to sound amazing, and no one's gonna know if you're doing 96 or 128. It's compressed anyway, but if it sounds great going in, it's gonna sound amazing even compressed, right? So -16 is the standard for podcasting, and Audacity has that built in to their software, which was much needed, because there's other software that has it built in, but Audacity didn't. So I'm glad that they decided to add that in there. So yeah, so you can definitely use that tool built into Audacity to edit your podcast. And guys, that is the audio signal flow. That is making sense of the audio signal chain. Hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I'll see you on the next one.